Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. The Bahamas Prime Minister announced a 14-day total lockdown. This story takes the lead in our 913th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Wednesday, 5th August 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. The government in the Bahamas has announced a 2-week lockdown as new COVID-19 cases continue to climb. The lockdown began 10 p.m. on Tuesday, August 4th. Bahamians will only be allowed to visit food stores and other essential service establishments on certain days during the period. There have been mixed reactions to the measures, with some residents expressing strong support for Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis's decision, while others have criticized the measure as being unfair and too sudden. The announcement comes as 31 more cases of COVID-19 were recorded on Monday in the archipelago of islands in the Northern Caribbean. The total number of cases is now 679, with most of those cases 320 in the Grand Bahama, while there are 291 in New Providence. The following is a statement from the Caribbean community on the Guyana elections declaration. The Caribbean community CARICOM welcomes the conclusion of Guyana general and regional elections of March 2, 2020 with the declaration of the final results. The community congratulates His Excellency Mohammed Irfan Ali, President of the Corporate Republic of Guyana, and the People's Progressive Party Civic PPPC on their victory at the polls. The chairman of CARICOM, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, called the President to extend his best wishes, while Secretary General Ambassador Erwin Larocque personally conveyed his congratulations to the President at Sunday's swearing-in ceremony. CARICOM commends the people of Guyana for their patience and maturity during the protracted process and will continue to support the country in its development efforts under its new government. Sir Sridhar Ramphal, meantime, issued a statement on the Guyana election results. Sir Sridhar is a former Attorney General and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guyana, Second Secretary General of the Commonwealth 1975 to 1990, former Chancellor of the Universities of the West Indies, Warwick, UK, and Guyana, former Chairman of the West Indian Commission, and a member of Guyana's legal team at the ICJ in Guyana-Venezuela border case. In the statement, Sir Sridhar says Guyanese everywhere and Guyana's many friends are relieved and grateful that the worst of times are over. Now must begin the best of times. To President Irfan Ali and his new government, I send fulsome congratulations on their election success. I welcome their expressed commitment to make those best of times come true for all Guyana and all Guyanese. The new government starts with the goodwill of all who stood by Guyana's side in the struggle that democracy and the rule of law has won. The environment of peace and progress is achieved. Guyanese must now seize the opportunity to build prosperous Guyana for all, without exception. The OWTU in Trinidad and Tobago is calling on Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley to intervene in discussions to have the refinery sale finalized before the general election. The union says it feels like there's an overwhelming amount of support for the non-closure of this deal as negotiations are being hindered. But he warns they have been patient for too long and will not be spooked into stepping away from this deal now. More in the CNC3 News report.
The acquisition of the Petrotrin refinery by Patriotic Energies and Technologies Company Limited has hit a snag. The deal, which was anticipated to be signed off in July, has not yet been completed. Today, the President General of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, Ansel Roger, expressed disappointment with the delay, but he says he is hopeful this is not a political ploy.
example, if you raise some spurious issues and so on, and you're not meeting with me, for me to say, hey, listen, where did this come from? And have those removed and then get back on track, well, then it stalls the process. What we are seeing is that there's an attempt somehow to ensure that this does not close before the 10th, and that is worrisome to us.
In September 2019, Patriotic Energies and Technology was selected by Cabinet as the preferred bidder to own and operate the refinery. Roger says there were 6 outstanding issues on the table which were resolved. However, he says unrelated issues are now being raised. The OWTU President General says the current situation does not reflect the commitment given by the government in mid-July that the deal would be closed in a matter of days.
Just one clause away, when in fact they introduced some 20-something issues, and issues that are not even on the table. So for whatever reason, we think that the Prime Minister should really take control of that team and make an intervention to make sure. Talk with us.
The OWTU president says he believes that these hiccups are an attempt to spook investors. However, Energy Minister Franklin Kahn told CNC3 News the negotiations were at a very advanced stage and he believes will be finalized very soon. In a brief telephone interview, Kahn said it is a very complex agreement and they have a duty to protect the interest of the state. He says some of the issues raised by the negotiating team were minor, but all must be thrashed out. At this stage, he says he sees no impediment to the signing of the deal, but the state cannot be negligent in the negotiations.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
The nomination of United National Congress's general election candidate for Princestown, Barry Paradath, is now under question and being challenged by the People's National Movement. According to PNM, Paradath used the wrong form. However, based on law, he could contest the seat, but the results can be overturned.
Conference, the PNM's party chairman, Colm Imbert, said Paradath's nomination should be deemed invalid after the incorrect form was used. According to Imbert, election rules stipulate that once a candidate is in the country, form number 37 should be the consent form submitted to the returning officer. However, after close inspection by the PNM, Paradath, who was in quarantine at the time of the filing of his nomination papers, had an agent hand in form number 38. That document is used only when a candidate is absent from the country. When contacted, Paradath said his documents were deemed valid by the EBC and slammed the PNM for trying to sabotage him.
This is pure political mischief and desperation of the People's National Movement. I have been advised by the EBC that I am the UNC candidate for this general election. So again, this is pure PNM machination.
Imbert denied claims that the revelation was a deliberate attack on Paradath. He said the right process must be adhered to and promised to challenge his bid to represent the area.
So in this particular case, we believe that the Representation of the People Act is sacred and should be followed religiously. And therefore, it is our intention to challenge these nomination papers.
Imbert said if Paradath is elected and the courts rule against him, the seat should automatically go to the PNM.
Whoever loses this general election should step down. This is the view of political analyst Derek Ramsamouge, who says this election is shaping up to be yet another election determined predominantly by race. It's something he sees as a failure on the part of the political parties. TV6's Renessa Cutting reports.
If your programs and policies are not credible, if your leadership is suspect, and if your winnability element to form a broad enough political coalition is not sufficient enough for you to win seats that historically you may not win, then it tells you it is going to be a time for a change of leadership.
Come August 11th, the political leader who does not assume office should promptly submit his or her resignation. This is the firm belief of political analyst Derek Ramsamouge, who notes that from time immemorial, governments in this country have been chosen predominantly on race.
This election will clearly demonstrate that race will unfortunately trump policies and that money will buy race. And that is why the finance campaign reform was important. Because if after one political party being from 1956 and the other one being from Club 88, they have not been able to expand their political base through leadership, it tells you there must be a recognition of failure.
Ramsamouche is of the view that once again the next government will be determined by a small percentage of undecided voters seeking credible plans and policies, elements which he feels are lacking in the UNC's manifesto, which speaks to tax cuts and wage subsidies.
This is a former prime minister, a former government in office, and we should have expected a little more when it comes from where the money is going to come from, how is it going to be paid, how do you manage this in a post-COVID economy, and therefore it is short on detail. Which brings us to the question is, can you trust this leadership?
On the other hand, he says the PNM is banking on its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on the social safety net, retaining of jobs, and sustaining the economy moving forward. But Ramsamouche notes, just as there will be life post-COVID, the population must also remember that there was life before the pandemic.
The PNM have been in office prior to COVID-19, and the business sector, there were challenges with it. The energy sector, there were challenges with it as well. Agriculture was not diversified. So there were economic challenges before COVID-19.
Ramsamouche is appealing to the electorate to judge the parties based on their performance while in government and not vote based on race. Vanessa Cutting, TV6 News.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.